the neurologist was trying to kind of be like, hey, you're never going to work, you're never going to be independent, and you're probably going to be living with your parents for the rest of your life, and you're probably never going to have a full-time job. So you kind of have to like come to terms with that, and we have to figure out what you're going to do.
Welcome back to the freeCodeCamp podcast. I'm Quincy Larson, teacher and founder of freeCodeCamp.org. Each week we're bringing you insight with developers, founders, and ambitious people getting into tech. This week we're talking with Hiroko Nishimura. She's a special ed teacher turned system administrator turned technical instructor. Hiroko grew up in Japan, moved to the U.S., and in her early 20s, she was diagnosed with a vascular tumor in her brain. After life-saving surgery, she had to work to regain the ability to walk and talk, and she still lives with disabilities to this day. Despite this, Hiroko has gone on to author technical books, become an AWS hero, and create the popular AWS newbies community. More than 500,000 people have taken Hiroko's LinkedIn Learning course. Hiroko, welcome to the freeCodeCamp podcast.
Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, I am so jazzed to talk with you and learn more about you. I have known of you for many years because so many people use your learning resources to prepare for AWS certifications.
Yeah, I mean, when I first got back into like, hey, this coding thing, like freeCodeCamp was the first thing that I learned about. So this is kind of like synergy moment here going on.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we're thrilled that you found freeCodeCamp useful over the years as you've continued to expand your skill and then figure out how to synthesize those skills you're learning and teach them to other people because you do have a teaching background, and we'll delve into that. But I like to take it all the way back just so our listeners can have full context in your life's journey and who you are as a person. Maybe you can start off with just talking about your childhood. I understand you spent the first 7 years of your life living in Japan.
Yeah, so I was born in Kyoto, Japan. It's a pretty popular destination these days with the economy the way it is. And I moved to the US to the East Coast when I was 7 because of my dad's job. And we were supposed to go back after 5 years or so, but then clearly it didn't happen. And we've been here for the past almost 30 years. So I started my education here in the United States as a first grader, and I've been here ever since.
Yeah. Kyoto is an amazing city, by the way. If anybody wants to travel there, I was just there a few months ago.
Oh, wow.
Visiting like a lot of the different temples and visiting nearby city of Nara, which is like the old capital with the adorable little deer that come over and eat crackers out of your hands. Yeah. And
they bow to you.
They're very polite. Well, unless you have a cracker in their hand that they really want. But it's not dangerous.
And they'll headbutt you.
Yeah. It's the most gentle of headbutts, usually. But my kids had a great time interacting with them. And what you said about with the economy the way it is, currently the Japanese currency is very weak against the U.S. dollar, and it's weak against a lot of currencies. So it's a good time to travel to Japan because you're getting like a 30% discount on everything you buy, basically.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad right now.
Yeah, it's bad if you're getting paid in Japanese yen, but if you're getting paid in U.S. dollars and you're going to Japan, it's amazing.
Yeah.
But yes, we'll see what they do. I know they're taking like interventionary steps to try to like get the currency to become a little bit stronger against the U.S. dollar and the euro. But this is not an economics podcast, nor is it a tourism podcast. So we will get back to your childhood. Okay, so you're here in a new country. You said you came over and it was first grade? Was that when you started?
Yeah.
So you're like a 7-year-old kid and you're in a completely different culture. Did you know any English before you arrived?
I didn't even know the alphabet. So it was, and I think thinking back, I don't even know if I really understood this concept of like a foreign country. Like I knew I was going to America, and it's like a different place. I'm moving, but I think this as a 7 year old and having never traveled outside the country before, I think it was just this like huge shock to my system that you're in this place where you don't understand a single word that anyone's saying. And I did start school the next day that we moved here for some odd reason. I was like apparently really excited. And then I went to school for a week and then I just couldn't go for the next month. I just couldn't get up from bed for next month.
Wow.
So I think my brain just like shut down, going like, okay, what is this? I don't understand what's happening here.
So it was like a
And it was,
literal culture shock.
I
Well, I
think
mean,
it was
how
like
would
a
you
literal
describe it?
culture shock. Yeah, I think my brain just didn't know how to process what was happening. I think if I were younger, because you don't really understand too much of the world anyways, and a lot of language is like foreign, even in your native language, it might have been not as much of a shock. And if I were older, I would have understood the concept of, moving into a foreign country. Sorry, this is my cat.
Yeah, for anybody watching the video edition on YouTube, I listen to the audio version. I think most people listen to the audio version. But yes, Hiroko does have an adorable giant cat that just walked in front of the camera. What's your cat's name?
So his name is Tama, and I have another one named Mia who's chilling on the side. But he's kind of mad because I took his chair that I haven't been in for the past year because I haven't been in my office in a very long time. So he's kind of upset right now, which is why he's walking back and forth because he knows there's a camera going on here.
Yeah, so he's trying. It's a protest.
Yeah, it's a protest. He protests a lot.
We'll give Tama a big love pat from all of the people of the Free Code Camp community. So it takes you a full month to recover after that first week, but you do eventually go back to school.
Yeah.
Like, how do you remember how you went about learning something as daunting? And learning English is hard, and you had to learn it pretty quickly.
Yeah,
Did they have like a Japanese like teacher who would kind of like help you, or did you just get thrown completely in?
So back then, at least in my school district, ESL was very new. So I think we shared one teacher across maybe, multiple schools, if not the whole entire county. So I think my ESL class, it was called ESOL back then, like ESOL, was like
and that
30
stands
minutes
for
every
English
week.
is a second language. Sorry to interrupt
It was
you.
like English is a second official language, is what it was used to be called. I think now there's like one more PC. So it's like English language learner, ELL or something like that.
Yeah.
But back then now I think they have it's a pretty like created, there's a curriculum for it. But back then it was like, hey, here's a flashcard of an apple, say apple, 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 and then you're just like, ha ha ha, with other kids who also don't happen to speak English. And then they're like, okay, go back. So I honestly don't know how I managed to learn English with having like 30 minutes a week of like English education. Otherwise, I was the first Japanese student ever in the 40-year history of that elementary school. And so I was like this like guest, and everyone's like, oh my gosh, there's a Japanese kid. Look at her hair. It's that like bowl cut. Like, oh my gosh. And I think there wasn't even that many Asian kids in the school either. So they're all like, oh my God, look, there's an Asian kid. It's a Japanese girl. But somehow I managed to learn English pretty quickly. And I think I was streamlined into the main curriculum within a year. But my mom always says, especially after I've had kids, that my language skills were like 2 years ahead of my age, like developmental milestone wise, which is probably why I was able to learn English really quickly. And I also had a really good foundation in Japanese. And bilingualism is like something I'm pretty interested in right now because I just recently had 2 kids and I would love for them to be able to speak Japanese so that they can talk to their grandparents. But I'm like, they don't even speak one language right now. I don't even understand how this like 2 language thing goes. So I've been thinking a lot about it. I've been like learning about it. And my method is apparently what they say is like you get one language squared away, and then you add to that, which was the way that I learned English. And because my language skills in Japanese were pretty good already, I was able to map English onto Japanese and learn pretty quickly. So I think after a year, I was like just mainstreamed into the classroom. I was always mainstreamed in, but they didn't expect me to be able to do anything or understand anything. And then by third or fourth grade, I was like in the above grade level classes.
Oh, wow.
So it didn't take me very long to learn English and then learn with English. But I think then the problem became my Japanese, because we were intending on going back to Japan after like 5 years. And when I did, I had to be at the grade level that I'm going back as, not as a 7-year-old. So my mom worked really hard to keep my Japanese side up too. And I
Yeah.
think that's probably the harder part of it, is maintaining your mother tongue when you're 24/7 in an English community with no Japanese people. So
Yeah. Well, tell me about your kids. You mentioned you've got two kids now?
I have two kids. So one is about to turn 2 and one is 4 months old.
Wow. So you're like very
Yeah.
recently out of, postpartum, like,
I'm
and
probably
both of your
still
kids are
postpartum.
super young. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's wild. Like, so, did you, were you able to take any time off, from your arduous schedule of like writing books and creating courses and things like that?
Yes, so I'm self-employed. So most of my work is like product based, which was really convenient for this because I finished my book. I have a book called AWS for Non-Engineers. I finished that 1 month. I finished the manuscript 1 month before my first child was born. And then I was like, stop contacting me. I'm done. Like, I want to birth this thing at any moment now. And of course, they still keep on contacting me because they're like, what about this edit? What about this edit? And I was like, I don't care if you replace half of it with Pokemon at this point. I don't care anymore. And then before my second child was born, I redid the whole LinkedIn Learning. I have a 4-course series on LinkedIn Learning called Introduction to AWS for Non-Engineers. But I redid that whole thing before I hit my third trimester. So I should be good to go for maybe another year or two, or until AWS decides to update the whole entire exam again.
Yeah. So that's great that that you have that flexibility, that because you're essentially like an entrepreneur, a free agent, however you want to describe being able to work on a project by project basis, and then also have that balance of being able to spend lots of time with your kids. We're going to delve into that so much, but first of all, congratulations on the birth of your second child. And
Thank you.
yeah, just to close out the language learning topic, my kids, my wife is she grew up in China, and we went to grad school together in China, and so she also had to learn English as a second language, and then moved here and worked in English as an adult. And so we're also very actively involved in trying to make sure our kids learn their mother tongue, both English, and they have to learn Cantonese and Mandarin, because my wife's Cantonese, and Mandarin is like the official language of like all the formal stuff, and the Chinese government's kind of trying to eradicate Cantonese by like marginalizing it. So there are very few learning resources for Cantonese. So we're doing the same thing. But yeah, like I'm right there with you to an extent, like in that we're trying to figure out how to balance the two. We did this thing where we sent my daughter to a kindergarten completely in Chinese. She was the only she's Chinese, but she was the only non-Chinese speaker at this school. And it was like, what happened to you? She just got kind of a culture shock,
it's a shock.
And she shut down, and we're like, oh, this didn't work very well. She ended up going for 2 whole months, but it was just, it was a lot to take in all at once. And I do worry that we pushed her too fast, and now she is not as enthusiastic about learning Chinese as my son is, because he didn't have that negative experience. So yeah, it's a very careful balance, and it probably depends child to child. But
Yeah. It's so up to the child that there's no like right way to do it that works for every child, even within siblings. And I'm just like, my husband's second generation Taiwanese American, so my mother-in-law wanted to try teaching him Chinese too. That didn't go very well. He knows how to say owl and grandpa and grandma. Um, I don't know why
yeah,
owl and elephant.
yeah,
But we're like, okay, you know what? We have to like get at least one language in first, and then
yeah.
Japanese is pretty close second, and then Mandarin, if we're lucky, we might be able to slide a couple words in there.
Yeah, I mean, it's
So
just a massive corpus of learning layered on top of everything else a
yeah,
kid would have to
yeah,
learn if they were just going through, K through 12.
yeah.
But I mean, I meet kids all the time who are adults now and like have grown up and like are natively able to speak, more than one language. And so I definitely think it's worth the effort. And I meet a
It's
lot of
good for
people
your
who,
brain too.
yeah, absolutely. Like it reduces the likelihood of dementia and Alzheimer's and like a lot of because there's like proven benefits to bilingualism or multilingualism. I guess in the case of your kids will hopefully eventually learn Mandarin as well. It's a very useful language. I
Yeah,
say this having spent 20 plus years trying to learn Mandarin. It's super duper hard.
yeah.
But it is also like I learned some Japanese. Here, I'm not going to go off on too much of a tangent, but I picked this cap up in Asakusa when I was there. It's got like this cool imprint, right? I studied. I'll give you a very very high level, like 30-second. So I studied Japanese in university, and I went to Japan for a few months.
Wow.
Did like immersive learning, and then after that, I moved to China for like 6 years and learned
Wow.
Mandarin and Cantonese. And then I came back to the U.S. and worked as a school director, worked as a software engineer, doing all this stuff that had no, like I didn't really use those at all. So I had to like pick those up and dust those off. But over the summers, I've been going to Asia and just speaking Japanese for 12 hours long or speaking Mandarin all day long and like trying to like rebuild those faculties. And I absolutely want my kids to be able to do that stuff. So it's like one of our big things. Like my wife is like, they have to learn piano and they have to learn Chinese really well. So, but anyway, like I think it's great that you're being so proactive about teaching your kids, and it's inspiring for me because I absolutely want my kids to learn those things. And if anybody's listening and they're a parent and they're like, maybe I should teach my kid Spanish or get like, yes, absolutely. I do think that there's a lot of benefit to learning as a kid and not just learning as a grown up, because I didn't start learning Japanese until I was like 18, 19, 20. And as a result, it was probably a lot harder for me to like, get like intonations and, vocabulary and everything. Anyway, this is not like a parenting podcast. This is not
a language
learning podcast.
It's not a parenting podcast. This is not a Japan travel podcast.
Yeah, but those things are very near and dear to my heart. So I appreciate the audience for humoring me, and I appreciate you, Hiroko, for humoring me as I talk about those things. So let's dive into your early experiences as, a Japanese American teenager using technology, because I understand that you were very quick to adopt technology as a kid, and you grew up kind of like during the first internet wave when people started getting like AOL CDs in the mail and like BBSs and all that stuff. Yeah, can you talk about that era?
Yeah, so I'm the dial-up generation. Though in hindsight, it only lasted a couple years, but I started. I first connected to the internet, I think, in middle school. I'm sure I connected to it in school and elementary school and stuff like that, but we first got a laptop that connected to the internet when I was, I think, in 6th grade. And it was black and white, but was like, what is this? And of course, the first thing I do is go find a Sailor Moon website, whatever. But so my dive into the internet was trying to find fellow teenagers, preteens who were interested in anime, because unlike now, for children who don't know, it was not cool to like anime and mangas back then. And you have to wait months, if not years, to get access to like mangas or videos, movies, and the only thing that was airing was Cartoon Network and Dragon Ball Z. And so we wanted to talk to people, but it wasn't that easy to find like kids in school to talk to. So I ended up finding people to talk to on the internet, which back then every parent told you not to do that because
Yeah.
it's someone living in someone's basement and it's not okay. But that's actually how I got into coding, which I didn't even know was like really coding at the time. We had this like community of girls, young girls who were really into anime and really into like creating fan sites. So we would learn HTML and CSS from like LisaExplains-It-All.com, which is apparently still active, and steal from each other's code when a new cool like effect came up. And we just created these fan sites, and we had blogs, and we were like sharing our love for a certain character or another. And I had no idea that this was like a career that people had. So I actually quit this whole entire fandom thing in after high school because I was like, okay, I need to get a real job after college. And so even though I was coding, quote unquote coding, very early, this is like 2000, early 2000s, because I graduated high school in like 2008. So I started in like 2002 or 2001 or something like that.
Yeah.
And no one had, I guess, growing up, maybe as a woman, as an immigrant, my parents were always like, get a job that you can always have a job in. So my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and she was really adamant that my sister and I get into a career that if you took off to raise kids, that you have a job that you can get back to. So she's like, you're pretty good with kids. You should be a teacher because you're not good at anything else. And I'm like, okay, rude.
She said that?
But at least you're not trying to make me become a doctor, whatever.
Yeah.
So thanks for your vote of confidence there. So ever since I was young, she was like, you should be a teacher. You should become a teacher because if you're a teacher, there's always a need for teachers, especially good teachers. So just become a good teacher. You can't do anything else. And I was like, okay, mom, whatever. And so, I need to get a real job. So I was like, okay, I'm going to become a teacher. I'm going to quit these hobbies. I don't have time for this. And so growing up, I was coding. I was in all the AP classes and in science, math, whatever. But it never crossed my mind that I could potentially like get into tech or, the STEM field because I grew up being told, hey, you can't really do anything and you're really bad at math. So you should teach because you're good at teaching children. And so I went into the education field and I enrolled in college to become a special ed teacher. And so I got my bachelor's and master's in special ed. And in that time, I stopped coding. I was like, oh, this is a hobby. To me, it was like, watching anime was the same level.
Yeah.
Even though, like, looking back, I was like, wait, if I had continued there and gone through with this, I would have like 20 years of experience before I was 30. It was like a mind-blowing thing that I realized too late. But while I was finishing up my undergraduate, I was diagnosed with a vascular tumor in my brain after having a seizure. And that just kind of like threw everything up for a loop because now it wasn't like, hey, you can't do anything, so become a teacher. It was like, hey, you may not be alive tomorrow because you might have a stroke. And so I kept on going to college and taking classes, but I like pulled back on the courses that I was taking. And I was waiting for my brain surgery, which was like half a year after my diagnosis. And it all went great. It was like, I think it went as well as it could possibly go. And they took out the vascular tumors, and it hasn't grown back since then. But what we didn't really anticipate was that even if everything went great, you're left with brain injury, and you have to, like, this is like a new life. It's not, you don't go back to being who you were before the brain surgery. You just have to like start your life as like Hiroko 2.0. And looking back on it, it's like obvious, duh, you like went in and like scrambled up your brain. But at that point, like my parents and I had no idea that that's how it is. We kind of assumed if it went well, I was fixed and I go back to how I was beforehand. So I had like a lot of memory issues. I had aphasia, which is like a language disorder where what you're thinking can't, like, you can't articulate it properly. It's very hard to get like words out, language out. And like you said in the intro, like I had to relearn how to sit, stand, walk, like use a spoon. You know, I had a tremor in my hand for a while, and just like we thought, you know, when those things were over after a couple months, I'm back to normal. And I was definitely not back to normal. And I still have like memory issues. I still have like executive function issues and like anxiety issues and stuff like that. And it took us a while to like be like, okay, this is just what we have to live with for the rest of my life. And after half a year or so, when we're like, wait, this is not a temporary thing, this is like permanent. They were trying to like, the neurologist was trying to kind of be like, hey, you know, you're never going to work, you're never going to be independent, and you're probably going to be living with your parents for the rest of your life, and you're probably never going to have a full-time job. So you kind of have to like come to terms with that, and we have to figure out what you're going to do. So I did end up getting my bachelor's and master's in special education, but I was kind of like, okay, now what do I do? Because special education is very notorious for being an extremely difficult job, both physically and mentally. And given that I had all these like disabilities and chronic fatigue, I was like, maybe this isn't the most like optimal career
Yeah.
choice for me now. And so I was like, okay, what can I do? I'm like, I think I need a desk job. And so I was like, what's something I'm really interested in, which giving my like recent experience with becoming disabled and all these things I took for granted. Like I was the kind of kid that if there's an exam or if there's a paper due next day, I stay up until midnight, study for it or do it, and then I'll probably get an A. And I thought that was normal, and that wasn't normal. And my new normal was like, I can't remember like what I decided I was going to do like an hour ago. So I have to like write everything down. I have to like have calendar reminders for everything, you know, and I was like, okay, well, what do I want to do? And I was like, you know, I want to do like advocacy work. And given that I was being told at that point, I can't drive, I can't get a job, I can't be independent, I kind of had this like feeling that at the point where I graduated from grad school, I was like, you know what, I have to like try something now, or I'm going to get way too comfortable in the situation that my parents will allow me to live in, because they're like, they think, you know, I can't be independent and they're going to have to take care of me. So they're fine with me moving back and getting a part-time job. And my mom would like even drive me everywhere because it's like her baby needs help, you know? So I was like, you know what, if I don't do something at this moment and try it, I'm going to regret it for the rest of my life. And even if it doesn't work out and I have to come back home because it didn't work out, at least I tried it. So I don't have to feel like, oh, what if I just did something at that point? So I just actually kind of like packed my bags and moved to New York. I had secured like a sublet online, and had secured like a part-time babysitting gig online. And then I was like, okay, I'm moving next month after I graduate to New York. Have I ever been to New York? Maybe like twice in my life. But I was like, I something like told me I had to like act now. And I'm a very, very, very cautious, high anxiety person. So I have no idea how I decided this was okay, especially because I've like literally never ridden public transit before. But I hopped on like a $15 Greyhound, and I had like $6,000 saved up from like the bank account my parents helped me open when I was 7, with all my like summer jobs and like little monies that I would get. I would like put it in there. And then I was like, you know what? I'm rich. I have $6,000 in here. Turns out it doesn't take you very far in New York City.
That's like a month or two of like living expenses in New York City. I mean,
Yeah. I mean, I also had no concept of money, so I didn't realize how expensive fruit was until I moved out of my parents' house. It was a whole culture shock. I mean, New York is a culture shock, but the fact that I couldn't buy fruits anymore and cabbage was actually really, really expensive was like a huge culture shock. Um, Yeah, so that's how I ended up in New York is like I decided one day to hop on a bus with my pillow and a backpack and a suitcase and I got a sublet and I'm like, all right, I'm a New Yorker now. Like, let's go.
wow.
And there's this concept in the disability ecosystem where I think it's like called like oh God, I can't remember what it's called anymore, but it's like basically a lot of disabilities are environmental in that if you take away society's like limitations, people's like disability, a lot of it can be like accommodated for. So in my case, because I couldn't drive, I was like, you know what, let's just remove the need to drive. If I'm in the city, I'm like everyone else. Like everyone takes the subway, everyone takes the bus, everyone walks. I can walk, I can take the subway. So that allowed me to work because that was one of the biggest hurdles to me working in the suburbs is that I couldn't drive.
Right.
And so I removed that. And so I was able to like look for jobs without having to disclose that I have these like neurological disabilities and chronic fatigue and stuff like that. But turns out no one really wants a 20-something-year-old with no job experience, no connections, and overqualified with a master's degree wanting an entry-level job in a field that's not that field. And so for half a year, I was like resume after resume. I think I put in like 600 resumes and I only got like one interview. And my sublet was about to expire. So I was like, okay, either I get a job within the next month or I have to go back home. And I'm like, you know what? I tried pretty hard. Yeah, it's okay. And then I actually landed an interview with a recruiting firm. So I didn't realize like recruiting firms, I thought they were out to get your monies. So I didn't like take any of their like interviews and stuff. But then I realized at that point that they actually take money from the corporation, not
Yeah.
the interviewee. And they actually like help fix your resume, would coach you for the interviews. I was like, wait a second, what was I doing for the past 6 months? Guess this
Oh
is like what
no.
getting an Asian is, for like,
So some of those 600 job applications might have actually worked out had
yeah, it
you
might have actually
been
gone
open
through if I
to
knew
talking with
that.
recruiters. Yeah.
Yeah. But,
Lesson learned. And
lesson
yeah,
learned.
recruiters are kind of your friend. Like, yes, you do need to watch out for like the dodgy ones,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
in general, like they
want
get
you to get
paid
that
if you
job.
get paid. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And there were like talks of like, oh, they take a portion of your paycheck for like 6 months or whatever. No, like the ones that I work with, they don't take anything from me. They want me to get the job. And the more I get paid, the more they'll get paid. So they're like helping you negotiate and stuff too. So I actually ran into Japanese recruitment firms in New York City. Like, who knew these existed in the United States? But basically, they try to like put Japanese speakers into Japanese companies that have offices in New York City. And I went in to interview as a recruiter because at that point I was like, I don't care, I just need a job. And they're like, oh, we actually just filled that job, but we heard you can speak English and Japanese. And they're like, would you be willing to work in IT? And I was like, what is IT? And they're like, don't worry, like we can teach you IT skills,
Great response.
but we can't teach you language skills.
Yeah.
So we want to buy your language skills, and we don't care if you don't have any IT skills because we can teach you that. And I was like, you know what? I don't have a job. $14 an hour sounds great when you're making $0 an hour. Let's do this.
Yeah.
And that's how I ended up in IT, is because I speak Japanese and they really, really needed a Japanese English bilingual help desk engineer.
Awesome.
And they were willing to buy that for $14 an hour.
So even though you didn't ultimately move back to Japan, I think you mentioned earlier your family was like preparing you for the eventual move back to Japan because the U.S. was only supposed to be like a 5-year tour, right? All that preparation and all that time and energy you put into maintaining your Japanese and continuing to expand it did ultimately serve you really well in New York City.
Yeah, it was
like.
really shocking because I grew up in Maryland, but where I grew up, there's like no Japanese people. So I didn't even understand that my level of bilingualism is actually pretty high because the only people I spoke with were my parents and my sister. And it was kind of shocking to realize that in this, like New York City has so many resources. They even have like elementary schools, preschools, like play dates, like bookstores, food, like everything you can even order in Japanese at a ramen restaurant. So I didn't realize like there actually aren't as many fully bilingual Japanese English speakers in New York as I had assumed.
Hmm.
And they were like, your level of bilingualism is actually really, really high. And we really want that for our client. Would you be willing to interview? And it got to the point where like the Japanese people I spoke to thought I just speak Japanese, and the people I speak to in English just thought I only speak English because they thought I was a native speaker in one
Yeah.
language or the other. And that was like a really interesting experience. And I think I never would have fully appreciated what my mother managed to do for us if I hadn't moved to New York and realized that she had actually somehow gotten a 7-year-old to like almost a professional level Japanese. And, she doesn't use the internet until 5, 10 years ago
Yeah.
when she discovered Gmail. So
Do you think that all the time you spent like reading manga and watching anime and stuff like did help kind of build out your vocabulary and your usage of Japanese?
I don't know about the vocabulary, but I definitely think what the people that I know of who are fully bilingual, they're all like, "Oh, I really wanted to play video games, and my parents refused to buy me video game if it's not in Japanese."
Yeah.
Or they're really interested in this anime, but then realize like there's a whole community in Japan that they could talk to online. So they learned Japanese, like these are like Japanese American kids.
Yeah.
And so the joke around that with us is like, just make sure your kids are an otaku, they're really into anime or manga or video games, and you're set because they're
Yeah.
intrinsically motivated to learn the language and use it. Whereas if you force them to do it, they're not going to be interested. So I
Yeah.
think for me, that really contributed, especially in reading and writing. Because if you just speak to your parents, you don't need to be able to read and write. But to be able to talk to people on the internet, you have to be able to read and write.
Yeah.
So,
And reading and writing isn't as big of a deal with like Roman character languages. With Japanese, you need to know like at least 3 or 4,000 Chinese characters,
Yeah.
in order to be able to like work in Japanese.
Yeah,
Like
and
Chinese
each
characters are a
character
huge
has
part.
like so many different ways of being read depending on the context
Yeah.
that I don't know how like people learn Japanese. It's just like,
It's not easy. Speaking from personal
yeah,
experience, the
yeah,
onyumi and the kunyumi and like all these
kunyomi,
other,
yeah. But then
you
there's
know,
like three of each, and then it's
yeah. Like
just
don't
a
get me
mess.
started on the character for like life.
Life
Like there are like I don't know, like 16 different ways to read it. Gosh.
and
Anyway,
meanings,
sorry.
different meanings. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not going to vent about the difficulty.
This
At
is not
least,
a Japanese podcast.
yeah. I mean, in Chinese, you have to learn, I don't know, 10,000 characters, 15,000 characters,
But
like
there's
four
only
times
one
as
way
many.
of reading it, right?
Usually, yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it does make it a little simpler in that regard.
Yeah.
So this is great. You're working in IT. You're using your Japanese language skills, and you're getting paid $14 an hour, which in the most expensive city in the United States is probably, ramen food, ramen money, or enough money to buy like a loaf of bread for lunch. Like, was it hard to survive on $14 an hour?
Yeah, so like I said earlier, I really didn't have a concept of money. And from $0 an hour, $14 an hour sounded great until I got the paycheck, then realized like actually they take like 30-40% off right there. And then I think my paycheck was like 1,000 a month or something, 1,500 a month or something like
Yeah.
that. And so that was like pretty shocking. So I actually kept tutoring and did some like babysitting and stuff like that. And tutoring was pretty good monies back then. And I've learned that this whole like being able to speak Japanese is actually a huge asset. So I was tutoring Japanese expat kids for their like American schools. because the parents didn't understand English, didn't understand the school system, didn't understand homework, what the teachers were saying. So I would like help them write their letters back to the teachers when they sent stuff over and stuff like that. And I was working kind of as like a bridge between the American school system and the parents, but also helping the kids like do their homework and study for tests and stuff like that. So I was able to get pretty good hourly rate with that. But it just kind of meant that, there's really no like social life. Well, first of all, I couldn't afford a social life. I just needed to pay rent. So I guess it didn't matter as much, but I basically worked 9 to 5, and then a couple nights a week I would be tutoring kids, and then on the weekends I might be babysitting kids.
Yeah.
But
Shout out
you
to
just
tutoring.
like did what you did. Yeah.
Because tutoring, like I tutored a lot and helped make ends meet when I was in university as well, and it's a great way. Like there's always some relatively wealthy parent who wants to find a safe, reliable person who could show up, who has the domain expertise, who has any sort of teaching ability. I mean, the fact that you actually had a master's degree in teaching was probably a huge upsell when you were talking to these expats. But like tutoring is a great way to kind of make money informally. And if anybody's looking to, I guess, build upon their current income, or if they're looking for a way to just survive while they're learning the code or while they're learning how to use, how to do sysadmin and stuff, tutoring. Sorry, that ends my endorsement of tutoring as a side gig. But I do think it's perhaps underexplored by folks out there. Yeah. So you're working on IT. You're being probably underpaid. Did you realize that you were being underpaid by this company?
I think it took me a while because I didn't even know what a normal wage was in New York. I just knew that I couldn't pay rent. Well, my rent was really cheap. It was like $750 a month or something.
That's really good.
And I was in like a bedroom in like an apartment with 3 other people, and there was someone living in half of a living room. With 1 bathroom, and the windows didn't close. It was like the polar vortex, and every morning, every afternoon, I was like, okay, God, if I don't come in tomorrow, please call the police because I might have frozen to death. It's like 4 degrees outside and it's snowing. So looking back, it was probably illegal housing thing going on. And I was like, how do we keep warm? And people were like, oh, open the oven and turn it on overnight.
What?
And I was like, that's how we die. So being that I could only afford
Why wouldn't
that,
the windows close? Were they just like broken or something? Or
they're just broken, yeah. And then the ceiling kind of came down too.
what?
Um,
So you were paying $750 to live in like kind of like almost like a officialized squatting.
yeah, I think these landlords, looking back, because I didn't know anything. I was like, this come from a middle class suburban life. Like I didn't even understand what was going on. I was like, I just need a place to live. But I think they targeted like immigrants who may or may not be there legally. And they don't speak English. So they could just provide these like very poor living conditions, and no, they're not going to complain, and they'll pay their rent because they don't want to get kicked out. So they didn't care how many people there were in there. They didn't care if it's broken. And I would go complain, and they'll be like, no one's ever complained before. And I'm like, because they don't speak English. Like, I speak English, and I'm an American citizen, and I have my rights here, and this is not okay. And they try to convince me. They would turn off the heat at 5 o'clock every afternoon. This is the polar vortex, right? And I was like, why are you turning off the heat?
They should turn it off during the daytime, not the nighttime.
So during the day, they work in the office downstairs. So they want heat during the day. So they turn it off at 5 o'clock when they leave. And I was like, this is not okay. Like, we need heat. And they're like, oh, heaters are, you work in IT. Heaters are like machines. So you can't just have a computer on 24/7. You have to turn it off or it'll break. And I was like, that's not how heaters work. But they're like, no, that's how heaters work. Like, if you don't turn it off every night, it'll break because you can't have it on 24/7. Computers break too. And they just like close the door.
That is freaking, that is dark. I mean, this is like, it's like Scrooge from, whatever. I mean, this is like the most Machiavellian landlord trying to manipulate you, gaslight you. Gosh.
Yeah. And they're like, oh, it's okay. I'm like, no, it's not okay.
Fix the freaking windows. What the heck?
Yeah.
Like, That's crazy. It doesn't sound like it'd be that expensive. I mean, maybe a few $1,000s to go fix the windows, and then like a lot of the problems are solved at the place. But yeah, anyway.
Why fix it if we live in there and they don't have to fix it, right? So, and they
Yeah.
can even turn off the heat at 5 o'clock every day. Yeah, looking back, I have no idea how I managed to like live through that phase. I thought it was okay. Like, I didn't think it was like as horrible as what I now know as a more socialized adult human being.
Yeah.
But I really don't think I would have been able to do my New York life if I weren't right out of college and had no idea what the real world was. So I just accepted everything as like, okay, this just must be what happens when you only make $14 an hour. This is just what you have to live with.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad
But
that.
after a while,
Yeah. I'm sorry.
after
Go
a
ahead.
while, I was like, maybe I should make a little more. So they did upgrade me to $37K a year after 3 months.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
big upgrade.
And I was like, all right, I'm set. And I got the paycheck again. I was like, I am definitely not all set because surprise, when your wage goes up, so does your taxes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was like, I was there for I think like 8 or 9 months, and I started from zero, absolute zero. I didn't even know what a server was. And I was doing all the tier one help desk related things, fixing your printer, fixing your computer won't turn on, it's not connected to the internet, stuff like that. My Outlook isn't working. It's like, have you tried to turn the computer, back off and then on and then, yeah. So I did all that stuff for like 9 months, and people thought I was like hilarious because they thought it was so funny that I speak English and Japanese, and then I'm like this young person, and it's like mostly old people, and they're like, they don't know what to do with me. And because my name is Japanese, I look Japanese, but then I don't act like a Japanese person because I've been raised in America. So they're just like really confused, and they think it's like so funny. And I was like, I'm learning a lot, but because it's such like a tiered environment where there's like tier one, tier two, tier three, server admin, like everyone has a job, like a very specific job. I couldn't even like click a button that I needed to do my job if that wasn't part of my like
Wow.
allotment. And they're not willing to give me that permission because then I will take someone else's job. And
Wow.
I was like, okay, I feel like I've learned everything there is to learn here. And also I need to get paid a little bit more so I can like move or something because I'm not willing to do another winter like this. And around the time where I'm like, maybe I'm getting underpaid, maybe, question mark. A recruiter reached out on LinkedIn going like, hey, like, are you interested in switching jobs? There's like I think the title was IT support analyst, but it was basically more like proactive maintenance as opposed to like help desk. So
Yeah.
we do help desk stuff, but it's more like making sure the servers are working, the networks are up, the backups being taken, stuff like that. And so to me, it was like, okay, I did the help desk stuff. Now it's like proactive maintenance is like a little higher up on the echelon where I get to kind of see like how ecosystem overall kind of functions. So I was like, okay, I'll do it. Like, we'll take an interview. And I managed to get the job, and I got 50K, and I was like,
Nice.
I'm set for life.
That's a
like, this is
milestone.
great.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I was like, dude, this is almost what I would have earned as a first year teacher teaching special ed with a master's degree. It's great. But then, surprise, it's still not enough. But I've since learned nothing is ever enough. So you just have to be happy with what you have. But
Yeah.
so there, I stayed there for about a year learning, like, how to deal with like small business clients. Because this was like SMB, it was more the
Yeah. Small, medium
we had
businesses.
clients
Yeah.
that we visited or we're managing remotely. Whereas the other company, I was like fully in the client office, and I was basically
Yeah.
their IT person. And so that's where I kind of started touching SaaS.
Software as a
And
service. Yeah.
yeah, before that, everything was on site. And I was like, wait, this is pretty cool. You can like do things on the internet. This is like really cool. It's like Facebook. And that's the level of IT comprehension I had working in these companies. And I was like, wow, wait, there's like, you can do things online. Like, this is pretty cool. I'm pretty good at online. I've lived online since the early 2000s. And I stayed there for a year. Turned out to become kind of like a toxic environment. And I was like, I need to kind of get out for my mental health, but I also need a job. And around then, I was able to be hired in as a IT support engineer or IT, like, it's back to like help desk, but it was in a startup.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like a completely new environment because they just finished a merger like a year earlier. So everything was like, whoo, and they're just trying to get the infrastructure up, and everything is SaaS, everything is on the cloud, and they just needed people to do stuff and get things done. So unlike the first company, if I can do it and I'm willing to do it, they're like, do it, do it, do it, do it, do it. And they'll just throw anything to me if I'm able to do it and I'm willing to do it. And then that meant that they get to focus, the higher ups can focus on stuff that they want to focus on to like help make sure the IT infrastructure is secured and like comprehensive. And so I like learned so much in such little time because of the pace that we were growing at.
Mm-hmm.
And we definitely didn't have enough people in IT for this like couple hundred people environment. So like everyone basically just had to do whatever it takes to get the things done. And because everything was on the cloud and we were using SaaS products and whatnot, I was like, wait, I'm like doing my job, but it's kind of like I'm on Facebook and I'm like, I know how to do these things. I've made websites before. You know, it's kind of like a
That's so
whole like,
interesting. So I mean, earlier you mentioned like if I just stuck with like learning about the web and building things with HTML and CSS and everything, then I would have 20 years experience by now. It's so interesting that you're kind of rediscovering. Oh, this is actually a thing. There are like
yeah,
web services, right?
yeah, yeah.
There's the cloud,
And
which
actually,
I mean,
yeah, it
yeah.
actually, yeah, sorry, but like it actually took me like a year or two into this job when I made a friend with someone who was working as a developer at that company. And because I'm in IT, I have the opportunity to talk to like everyone from like every domain and kind of like peek at what they do, and they'll tell me what they're doing and stuff. And I was like, and they were like creating a product, and I was like, wait, is that HTML? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, wait, people still use HTML? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, wait, I thought you guys use like some really complicated like programming language to make these things look pretty. He's like, no, this is CSS. And I was just like, what? And so it took me until like, yeah, like 2018 to realize like what I was doing in middle school was a job that paid you six figures. I mean, obviously you have to be like a lot better than I was as a 12-year-old, but
Yeah.
like I absolutely had no idea that, yeah, the syntax is a little different. It's been upgraded over the years, but like what I was learning and I thought was really fun and engaging in middle school was a literal career and that job in tech that everyone was talking about. And yeah, that was like a mind blowing moment. That's when I started poking back and started like the 100 days
100
of
days of
code,
code. Yeah, the
yeah,
hashtag.
challenge. Yeah, yeah, the hashtag back when it wasn't overrun by like impression zombies was
Yeah.
actually really
I mean,
helpful. People were like
it's still
so
good.
nice. It's still
So
good.
so Twitter, obviously under the current leadership
New management.
has not been the best place to get things done. There's like, but thankfully, Free Code Camp has a Discord server, and you can go there and you can just share your updates on 100 Days of Code there. So
Oh, okay,
there are a lot of
okay.
people that are pretty active. I've interviewed the gentleman who kind of started uh, 100 Days of Code. Like the hashtag, I think existed, but he popularized it through his challenge and got thousands of people doing it, including yourself and many
Yeah.
other people in the Free Code Camp community. So yeah, it's still going strong. And if you want to listen to that podcast, just search 100 Days of Code, or you can read my history of the 100 Days of Code challenge if you just Google history of 100 Days of Code. I will be putting links. I'll put a link to that in the show notes and in the YouTube video description, and I'll also be linking to many of the things that Hiroko mentions here as well. But yes,
That's around when I also discovered Free Code Camp, and I was like doing a little bit, and I was like, oh, this is too hard. So I actually didn't get very far in, but it was just kind of like it was very like strange realization that my sister is actually a developer. She's 3.5 years younger, but so to her, it was a career that people suggested, but she had never coded like she wasn't a computer person until she decided to become a CS major in college. She was a math major, and then she added on the CS major. But I had been coding since middle school, but no one had floated this idea to me that this is a career and a job. So I'm wondering if something changed in those couple years between when I was applying for colleges and when she applied for college. But I always think it's like really interesting how different my life would have been if I had realized back then that what I thought was really fun and was my like biggest hobby in middle school became my career.
Yeah.
But that's neither here nor there. But yeah, so that's how I got back kind of into this like world of like interacting with people online to talk about tech and code and share what I'm learning. And one of the things I was doing ever since I started my career in IT was making like how to articles for myself
Yeah.
when I learned how to do something for my job. Because I have such bad memory from my brain surgery, the only way to compensate for that was like meticulously like writing down everything so that I tomorrow, who would have 100% forgotten what I learned today, can like just read it and replicate what I've done. And a couple years on, turns out that's like actually a pretty coveted skill in IT because you want as little tickets as possible. And the way of creating less tickets is making very, very comprehensive and easy to understand how-to articles. And we were just implementing that in Zendesk at my startup company that I was working at. And my manager was like, hey, here, you're always writing these like how-to articles. And sometimes you share this with me when I'm asking about something like, do you want to like start creating the support articles for Zendesk? Because we just bought this new like subscription model or something that allows us to do this. And if we fill out the knowledge base, when they're writing a ticket, it'll like recommend an article. And if you click on it and then it solves your problem, you like click, this has helped me. And then that's one less ticket we have to deal with. And I was like, yeah, sure, that sounds great. Like less that I have to deal with. And I can focus on more of like the real problems instead of like, oh yeah, copy and paste the same answer over and over again for this thing that's just like click the other button or something like that. So that's how I unknowingly gotten into technical writing, is creating all these like how-to articles and problem-solving articles and stuff like that, which I had been doing for myself for a couple years by that point.
Yeah.
And
So
when,
learning in public, that's a term
yeah,
you used before in
yeah,
some of your past writing. And can you describe learning in public and like how it has been so instrumental in your career? It sounds like you went from just writing things for your own reference so you could prepare for different certification exams and things like that to other people using those resources to ultimately writing the book on the topic
yeah.
as a result. Yeah. But what is learning in public, and how would you kind of describe that approach?
Yeah. Yeah. So learning in public for me is when I learn something, I'm like Googling a lot. I'm trying to like ask people questions. If I'm really stuck, I'll like ask Twitter's 100 Days of Code or some community that I had back then to help me kind of like figure it out. And ultimately, I'll figure it out. But I had gone through so many steps and so many people and so much time. And I'm like, you know what? If what I wanted didn't show up on Google, that kind of means like, hey, maybe there's something for me to be like, hey, this is what I've done. This might help you too. And so I think one of the biggest reasons why I was able to start this like learn in public thing really like early and robustly is because I knew I didn't know anything and I didn't have anyone to impress because everyone hired me knowing I don't know anything. And so I was like, oh, look, I learned this, I learned this. I didn't have to pretend that I already knew this thing. And so I was like, oh, figure out how to do a blog, and then again in the 21st century. And then I started writing these articles when I learned something. And even if it's something on the job that I learn, if it's like applicable to the public, then I would like start publishing like similar things online, being like, hey, this is what I learned today. And people, and then I would like, it'll post on Twitter or something. People are like, oh, I was looking for that. It's like, oh, I was trying to figure that out. You helped me. And I was like, wait, like something I, as someone like with a complex of not knowing anything, can help people, not because I know more than them, but because I'm just 2 days ahead of them. And that was like a huge aha moment for me, that just being 2 days, 1 or 2 days ahead of someone else can help that person like figure something out that took me 2 extra days to figure out. And that was like, I think that was like a pivotal moment in my like publishing and learning online kind of thing, learning in public. And I was trying to figure out how to like level up in my career, and I wasn't sure even what kind of careers existed in IT above this like tier 1, tier 2 help desks, like support. And at that time, I mean, AWS was always big, but that's when I learned about AWS, was like around 2018, because we were implementing it at our work. And I was like, I have absolutely no idea what this is, but my friend says like when he got these certifications, it like really leveled up his career. So let me like check it out. And I checked it out. I had absolutely no idea what was going on. But I told my manager, I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to get this like solutions architect associate certification. And he was like, okay, Hiro, let's start with this new certification that came out that's called like the cloud practitioner.
Yeah.
Because we want to start with a win for you. And I was like, thanks for your vote of confidence. But you know what? If you're going to give me credit for it, whatever, like,
Sure. Yeah.
So basically he was like, you're going to fail the solutions architect and you're going to get dejected. So let's start with the cloud practitioner exam first.
Oh man, you're like your life. You're like your mom's telling you like, oh, you're only good at teaching. Don't bother with other stuff. The doctor's telling you, oh, you're never going to work. And now your boss is telling you, oh, you can't pass the solutions architect. You got to start with the certified
the
cloud
foundational
practitioner,
certification.
right? The first one. Yeah.
Which I mean, like every person that said these things to me, like mean it not in a mean way, but they just want me to like not fail, I guess.
Yeah.
And I could have taken it or left it, right? And I decided to take it. And I was like, you know what? If you're going to give me credit for passing the certification exam, I'll do it. And I was like, it's a foundational exam. It's for people who have no experience in tech and the cloud. This is great. I can do this. And I'm like learning about it. And I'm like, I have absolutely no idea what's going on right now. And it took me a couple years to figure out why it was so hard. Because a lot of people back then were also like saying like, oh my gosh, I don't understand any of this, but this is supposed to be a foundational exam. And I think because it was so new, I think it's only been out for a couple months at that point. What a lot of platforms, the teaching platforms and like blogs and stuff were doing was taking the Solutions Architect Associate exam content and just piecemealing it together to create the Cloud Practitioner exam. So they're like, oh, EC2 is on there. So they will take the Solutions Architect Associate content and be like, okay, EC2.
Interesting.
And then, oh, S3. Take the Solutions Architect Associate, put it S3. But the fundamental difference between the Cloud Practitioner exam and Solutions Architect is Solutions Architect exam is for people who work in the cloud and work in IT and at least have like legacy infrastructure knowledge, even if they don't have a cloud knowledge.
Right.
And a lot of them were being touted as like, oh, you can have zero cloud knowledge. We're explaining it to you like you're 5, stuff like that. And I was like, clearly I'm not even a 5-year-old because I have absolutely no idea what's going on. But the Cloud Practitioner exam is marketed for people who actually have zero foundational knowledge. And that was the gap that I was experiencing. And I thought with a couple years of IT experience, like I could, like I was already at that, like I could take the Solutions Architect Associate exam if I studied for it. But because I didn't have like the legacy IT infrastructure background, it was still like gibberish to me. And there's so many terminologies, so many new concepts that I've never seen before in my life. And I was like getting really dejected, going like, wait, I thought this is like the chill way to go. Like this was like supposed to be an easy win for me, but this is clearly not working out. And I had kind of put myself into a hole because I was like, I'm going to take this exam, and I registered for it. And I only had like 2 weeks left for the exam date. And I still had no idea what even like EC2 was, because it's just like so much information coming at me that I didn't know what was important and what wasn't important. And stuff for the solutions architect associate exam, there's too much information. And it's too complicated for someone with like literally starting from zero to understand. And there's a lot of stuff that wasn't important. Like, yeah, it's important if you're going to be a solutions architect, but not important if you're just trying to figure out what the heck an EC2 is, like all the instance types and what the probability of it going down and stuff are. And I think like there's like the paralysis when there's way too much information coming at you and you don't know what you need to learn to pass this exam. And so I was like, okay, how do I learn best? And I'm like, I learn best by like regurgitating what I've learned into my own words and teaching someone else, especially with my like education background. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to create a study blog, and I'm going to pretend I'm like teaching someone on the other side of the screen what I've learned. And I'm going to synthesize all these resources and look at the official study guide, and see what exactly I actually need and what I don't need. And I'm only going to write what I need to pass the certification exam. And that's how AWS Newbies got started. And so I just bought the domain. I spun it up on EC2, the WordPress instance. And I was like, look, I'm a pro now. I've spun this virtual machine up. It took me a while to figure out how to turn it off, but whatever.
Yeah. If it works, it works. Right?
It worked, right? Yeah, I don't know what I did, but it worked. And, I was like, that's good enough for me. I even wrote a how-to article on that, and people are like, that's wrong. And I was like, you know what? It worked. Okay, whatever. But so
did you incorporate any of their feedback?
At that point, I was like so beyond that. I was like, oh, I can't even log back in. I don't know. Like, well, people were talking about it like years after, because that's when they like found
because people will constantly find your old article, and like I have this all the time, because I've written like 500 plus tutorials about different things that I've learned over the years. Because like you, I also learn best by taking what I've just learned, synthesizing it, and publishing it. I love learning in public, and that's how I learn. So I can, like, this is one of the things. If you learn in public and you're constantly creating these artifacts that you're learning, you're going to constantly be receiving, Twitter DMs or like people on Reddit mentioning you. Hey, what's wrong with your tutorial? Like, it's broken. Come and fix it. And you're like, I can't even remember.
The link doesn't work.
Yeah. Oh,
like,
you'll get a bunch of like blog spam, like people that are trying to get backlinks. Like, oh, I noticed this link is broken. Well, here's a perfectly great article you could link to. I get so many of those emails.
And we won't pay you any money, but we want you to put it in there.
Yeah. We just want the SEO juice from you. We just did a favor. We fixed a broken link, and then I go and I read the article, and I'm like, oh, I'm just going to delete that paragraph. So I'm not going to link to this person that asked me. Because then I'd be incentivizing, and then they'd write me back next week with like 10 other links that they found that were broken, and anyway, sorry. Like that, I'm suffering from success. I've got too many popular blog articles that people are constantly trying to insert their links
first page of Google. First page of Google.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do with myself. I don't have that many articles on first page of Google, but well, back then I actually did, because the study blog that I created, turns out it was like filling this niche that I only understood like years later, that 0 to 1 part that people weren't addressing at that point. And I can only do 0 to 1, but apparently I do that 0 to 1 really well, because I don't understand. And for me to understand, it has to be pretty darn fundamental.
Yeah.
So I was basically creating what I wanted out of the internet. If I could have just Googled and found the kind of blog that I was looking for, I would never have started this whole journey, but I couldn't find it. So I created like every service, introduction, like very, very fundamental introduction on what you needed to know to pass the exam on like every service that they talked about, like, the pillars, like all these things.
Yeah.
And I even came up with like some silly, like SIPFA for like the pillars and stuff like that. I don't know, that's like the SaaS and like PaaS and like
Platform as a
IaaS and stuff like
service,
that. But
infrastructure as a service. Yeah.
yeah, now it's like all changed. So now you can't even like use that anymore. But the amount of people that have mentioned this like really silly like bunch of letters to help them memorize, it has been like shocking to me that like
So you
this
created
thing
your
that
own
I just was like,
mnemonic that
oh, this
people
is
have learned.
funny. Yeah. And
Yeah.
then people are actually using it to pass the certification exams. And I was like, this is mind blowing.
Yeah.
And then people were like, haha, it doesn't work anymore. And I'm like, I know. Um,
Well, so I
but
want to back up and talk a little bit about like your key advantage here. Not only do you have a ton of like theoretical knowledge about teaching from getting master's degree in special education, which is, arguably one of the hardest forms of teaching. Bo Carnes, who runs the Free Code Camp YouTube channel, worked as a special ed teacher for like 5 or 6 years before he got into software development. And I have lots of friends who do special ed teaching, and it's extremely difficult because you have no idea. Like every learner is coming to you from a different perspective, and it's even more varied and filled with just like unknown unknowns and stuff than normal teaching is. But one of the big advantages, because I've listened to a lot of interviews with you, and in one of the interviews you talked about how like, oh, I'm not the most qualified person to write a book about AWS. Like, why would you want me when you've got like these, architects who have like decades of experience,
10 years of
CTOs who
experience,
built
yeah.
like massive infrastructure on top of AWS. Like, why not get somebody from Netflix to write about AWS? Why would you want me? But the fact that you approach it with like relative beginner mindset is a massive advantage, and people can relate to what you're saying much more than they can relate to some CTO with 10 years of experience building on the cloud.
Yeah, the beginner's mind, I think, is like the biggest asset that I had, which I would never have figured out until I like entered this space, because until then I was like, not knowing is a bad thing. Like I need to learn as much as possible, and I need to become, like the stereotypical sysadmin or something like that. And like, and then when I entered this like learn in public space, I realized like the fact that I don't know, and then I will know, and then I can backtrack and teach someone to get from where I was to where I am now is like a huge asset, because there's a lot of people who are teaching like really comprehensive courses for people who have like foundational knowledge, but getting from zero to like that foundational knowledge is actually really, really difficult. And I feel like I can like release everyone to the world once they get that foundational knowledge, and they'll be able to take advantage of the really high quality resources out there. But back when I started, there was actually very little like 0 to 1 content. And special education, it's all about accommodations and modifications to meet that specific student's needs, and not necessarily like making the content easier or like whatever, but you try to get to the core of what is it that you need to teach this student to do. And then how do you get rid of all the stuff that's not completely necessary for them to acquire this core skill, but they will acquire it in a way that fits them the best. And I feel like IT help desk really like required that of me, because you don't know where they're asking this question from and what level of technical skills they have. And working a couple years in help desk has helped me like further be like, okay, this is how you need to explain things. These are the words that you need to use, not these real words, not these like technical jargon, but like these words. And even while I was working in like startups and stuff, my coworkers would be like, it's really actually really nice talking to you when you come to troubleshoot, because you actually explain things to me in ways that I understand without all the technical jargon. So I actually know what the problem is. So next time I can fix it myself. And I think like the special ed background really fueled into that. And then my experience actually working with people as a help desk person really helped like get me to the next level, where I'm explaining it to like the general World Wide Web, the 0 to 1 concept.
Yeah.
And I was fully intending on taking the solutions architect associate exam after I passed the CLF, but I've been stuck here for the past 7 years because there's just like so much need from the 0 to 1. And once I published that blog and then I passed the exam, I studied my own blog and passed it. So I'm like, okay, this works. And then I got an email from LinkedIn Learning going like, hey, do you want to make LinkedIn Learning courses about this
Oh,
content? Like that was literally like maybe a 1 or 2 months after I published the website. And that's when I was like, I think you're talking to the wrong person. This is literally the wrong person.
yeah.
Like the reason why I made that blog is because I have absolutely no idea what's going on. But that's when the content manager was like, well, we have a lot of really, really distinguished and very decorated instructors who have decades of experience. But when you are so far into the depths and you know so much, sometimes it's hard to relate to the people who are starting with zero. And she's like, you have the ability to bridge that gap. And because you're a beginner yourself, but you've also been able to acquire a certain level of knowledge, you're able to bridge that gap that's missing in our platform right now because we have so many really like deep stuff, but we need the beginner content. And we really think that's like an important next step when we're getting all these people that don't work in IT or don't have a engineering background
Yeah.
coming into cloud. And everyone has to be able to kind of work with the cloud now, even if you're not in engineering. You know, you could be in finance, you could be in legal, like you still have to understand the core concepts. And she was like, I think you'll really be able to make a difference there. And that's how I kind of got into the technical instruction, kind of like fell into that bucket.
Yeah. So you've kind of stayed more focused on the foundational level rather than continuing to climb the skill tree and like, hey, I've got a certification prep course for every single cloud certification. Like my friend Andrew Brown, like he is like he was a CTO and he's
Like
got like
everything.
tons of knowledge
Yeah.
and so he has courses on like every certification preparation, but they're not as robust and like focused on like single minded, I guess, as what you have with your LinkedIn Learning courses. So I think it's really cool that you've chosen this very specific niche and you've continued to interact with people in the community and like keep this like super duper up to date as you hear back from people in the community. Can you talk about the Cloud Newbies community or the AWS Newbies community and like the people you interact with that are going through your LinkedIn Learning course, or like how do you mainly interact with learners?
So I don't do too much like one-on-one interactions. People do message me all the time on LinkedIn and Twitter and stuff. They might have like questions about like potential careers or you know, what resources I recommend after watching my courses. And I would like send them links to like, it could be Andrew Brown's courses on FreeCodeCamp, or it could be like, I created like free study guides for the new updated cloud practitioner certification exam. And I would like send them
Awesome.
these things. But I used to try to have like a Discord community and stuff like that. It's still like alive, but I found Discord to be like pretty hard to manage for myself. So I'm debating whether to like move the platform entirely and start over, or just be like, okay, maybe huge community management is not for me. Maybe I'm more of like an output. And when people reach out, I'll do my best to help you kind of
Yeah.
situation. Especially because after I started teaching on LinkedIn Learning, I quit my corporate job and decided to focus full time on technical writing and technical instruction and stuff like that. And now, as we mentioned earlier, like I have 2 kids. And so
Yeah.
I can't go to like the summits. I can't go to a reInvent. I can't like move freely physically. And also like my time, even online, is like fairly limited.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's been kind of like a huge like turning point for me. I'm really like glad I fell into this online teaching space, because the way I get paid, it's like monthly royalty income. So I don't actively have to work to keep on getting the paycheck. I just have to be really focused and like really like do the job for the couple months that it takes for me to get the job done. and from the brain injury, and it seems like I was born with it, but I have like pretty severe executive function disorder. But the flip side of that is I'm not really good at the 9 to 5 everyday grind
Yeah.
kind of thing. But when I am like focused, I like spit things out so quickly that it like horrifies people. And so, what might take like, I guess, quote unquote, neurotypical normal person like a year to create, if I'm given the opportunity to just kind of sink deep, I could create within a couple months. And so LinkedIn Learning has been really like flexible with me on like the time horizon. Literally, I was supposed to do the updates for the CLF course, the Cloud Practitioner exam course, starting this January. Because I was like, oh, my kid will be a year and a half. My older one will be a year and a half. So I'll put him into daycare and we'll do that. And then I found out I'm pregnant last summer. And I was like, LinkedIn, we have a problem here. If we start in November, I'm going to have a baby. And this is just never going to happen ever again because I'm never coming back. I'm never going to come back to the surface. So we have to do this before I hit my third
Wow.
trimester.
So you decided to do it before. So you're, because a lot of people I think would be like, well, let's just push it back, and someday maybe I will be able to come back and finish this. But no, you're just like
I felt like I had to do it
clear my plate.
because they updated the certification exam so much in September that I'm not okay with like leaving something out there that I've created that doesn't serve what I want to serve, like the audience. And I felt like it's not fair to people who are taking my courses to have these like outdated courses. And so I was like, I want to do this. I really want to do this. And they like were like, would you like a co-author or something so that, you know, it's less that you have to do? And I was like, no, I want to control everything on this. You cannot do anything.
Yeah.
So I was like, no, I'm going to write this and I'm going to record this. But then I can't go to record it on site. So they have to send me a kit to record at home. And then I have a screaming toddler in the background. Then I actually had to pull him out of daycare because he was getting us so sick. And I was like pregnant,
Wow.
so my
He's
immune
bringing
system
stuff
is
home and
crashed.
getting everybody sick. Yeah.
Yeah, so I knew it was bad, but I didn't realize like you get sick and then you get secondary infections. And I actually got hospitalized. I had noro that he gave me, and then I got hospitalized because of noro, and I was getting really dehydrated. But I'm second trimester pregnant, and so I went to ER, and then I got sepsis at the hospital.
Damn.
But they can't give me any drugs because I'm pregnant. And I was like, so you just want me to die? Like, whatever. But like these kinds of things just kept on happening. I would get like strep. I would get like all these like infections. And I had like 6 weeks of nonstop coughing. And I realized like my voice is actually pretty important as a technical instructor. And around then, Andrew was like, oh yeah, I lost my voice. I'm getting AWS like to like speak for me. And I was like, oh, that's a great idea. And I was like, hey, LinkedIn Learning, can I have the computer talk for me? They're like, no. So
Yeah.
I had to get my voice back. But I was like, I need to finish. I have a strong deadline like I did with my book. I need to finish this before the baby's born, because once the baby's born, I'm not getting anything done.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I actually did finish it. And that's how it's out now. The updated version's out now. And so I feel better about people taking these courses because I'm like, I guess I have like a lot of pride in the quality of work that I put out. And if it's not up to par, I don't want it floating. It like really stresses me out.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad we were able to like update it, and LinkedIn Learning has been really flexible with me on that.
So you've got a compulsion for quality. Like you just do not tolerate it being out of date. And it sounds like even with everything going on, you still figured out a way to make it happen.
Yeah, I did contemplate leaving the screaming baby sounds on the recordings, but
yeah,
but I managed to cut them out.
Yeah, Andrew Brown has a degenerative voice issue. Like it's like permanent, like regressive, I think, or progressive. I'm not sure exactly how to say it. I'm sorry, I'm not a doctor, but basically, like his voice will gradually like become weaker and weaker over time. So he's been really experimenting with voice synthesis, But yeah, absolutely. That technology may soon be ready for prime time. So that might come in handy in the future when you've got like a crying baby and you still need to get like a transcript recorded.
Yeah.
This is so impressive to me. Your commitment to quality, your commitment to helping people learn. These people who've entrusted you with like, oh yeah, I'm using Hiroko's course. It's really helpful. And then they sit down and they actually pass the exam and they actually understand the concepts. They didn't just cram for the exam because you've spent so much time and energy really laying things out and explaining things. And so I just want to applaud you for taking your craftsmanship so seriously.
Yeah, I think if I didn't get so much positive feedback from people who have taken it, it wouldn't like have impacted me so much. But one of the things that has like really impacted me, I've like spoken to a couple people, and some people who've taken my courses in past have invited me on their podcast and stuff like that. And one thing that really stood out was one lady was like, I realized after taking your courses and passing the exam, until then she was like, I thought that IT just wasn't for me and it's like too hard and it's too technical, it's just not for me. But she's like, I realized it's just the way that I was getting the information that wasn't for me. And
Yeah.
if I got the information in a way that was digestible for me, then I can understand it. And that just like really like was like wow moment to me that I can have that kind of impact on someone with, a couple months of work, even if there's a screaming baby in the background. And that's kind of like those kinds of feedback people have told me. They became a solutions architect after taking my courses from an ASL interpreter and stuff like that, and works at Amazon and stuff like that. And I'm just like, that's just like mind blowing to me that I could do something like this. And I don't hate doing it. Like, I actually think it's like pretty fun. And so I'm like, well, if I, with a couple months of work, can have this kind of impact for over 500,000 people now, I'm like, you know what? This is pretty nice.
Yeah.
And you get paid, and I get to have a pretty flexible work-life balance,
Yeah.
especially with all my disabilities and like chronic illnesses and stuff, and like energy ups and downs.
Yeah.
It's worked out pretty nicely for us.
Well, I want to fire off a few rapid fire questions because I want to be mindful of your time. I know you've got two kids to get back to, and you've got a lot of other work going on. You talked about how it's been great to be able to do what you love, helping people, and that it's pretty enjoyable creating these courses. One of the things that you've mentioned is that your husband has a pretty stable, kind of like regular income, and that your income is more variable because you're getting royalties and, from books, courses, things like that. But it sounds like you two have kind of like really made like a good, I guess, financial setup. I don't know how to say it, but basically like where you're keeping the lights on with your variable income that can go really high when you publish a new course or a book or something, and then can go back to like some sort of baseline. Maybe you can talk about how you've made that work, because I know there are probably a lot of couples out there that are thinking about like, I was in this situation. I was working as a software engineer and I wanted to leave my job and focus full time on developing freeCodeCamp and developing projects that would ultimately lead to freeCodeCamp. And my wife had a full-time job working in accounting, so she was able to support that. And we had, importantly, in the U.S., we had health insurance through her job. Maybe you can talk just a little bit about how you and your spouse approach this.
Yeah, so health insurance was actually the most important thing for me because of all my like disabilities and medical conditions. And at that point, I had rheumatoid arthritis. So my like even with insurance, the doctor's visits were like running me at least $800 per visit. And so I was like, I feel like this teaching online thing is going somewhere. But at that point, I was only making like a couple $100s a month from it. But I was like, zero to something is the hardest part. After this, it's like scaling and people knowing my name and wanting me to work as a technical writer or like a consultant for them. I was like, I feel like this is going somewhere, but I need health insurance. And we also probably need like a stable income. So my husband has a stable income. He has a stable job. And so we've been able to make it work that way where we created a lifestyle where we are only reliant on his income to run our, expenses. Like everything comes out of his paycheck, and my paycheck can go anywhere from zero to like on a crazy month, like 24K or something. But it's never like stable enough that I feel comfortable like putting a mortgage on it or something, because at any moment, because I don't own the platform, they can just pull my courses and from next month on my income can become zero. That's like I think the hardest part for me is like, you really don't know. And like AWS updates the certification exam, or heck, they might even pull the certification exam entirely. Then it's like goes to zero. So living on one income has been a pretty important part of how we've like managed our finances. And so everything, like when we got married, it's like, okay, it's our money, no matter who brought it in. But we kind of separate it in that his money is the family money, and my money or my income, we kind of save or invest so that if we need to buy a house or we want to take a huge trip or something like that, it's there as like a good bonus money. And thankfully, like the bonus money has been pretty good for the past couple of years. So I've felt okay, having children in this crazy daycare environment. I did not know how expensive daycares were until we started looking, and it's just like astronomical. There's like an extra zero behind everything. I had no idea. And now we have two.
Yeah.
So I think like it's just been really instrumental that we've always been talking about money since even like before we started dating. And once we got married, we're very like everything is, there's no hiding money stuff. We are very open about money. We have like a shared account on like Simplify, Quick and Simplify, now that Mint is gone, of like everything, so that we can like manage our finances and invest and like plan for our kids' future and stuff like that together.
Yeah.
And I think without that kind of like transparency, it would have been really hard for me to have trust in our system to quit that full-time job, because that baseline income is like so important to me that we maintain month to month. No matter how bad business is, you still get paid a paycheck until the company like goes kaput. I feel like everything just went out the window with COVID, but before COVID is when I left my corporate job. So the world was a little more stable back then. I don't know if I would have made the same decision when COVID, if I were leaving my job during COVID. But pre-COVID world, I felt like we had a pretty stable thing going on, and we're fully transparent with our finances, which has helped make this work.
That sounds like
and health insurance.
That sounds like a really great team effort. And I applaud you all for, being so thoughtful and deliberate about that. Like a lot of people, it takes restraint to say, no, this income, this windfall could go away, right? Like platform risk. What you said, freeCodeCamp, for example, we're trying to gradually diversify our charities' source of revenue and get more people to support us directly, because it's harder to get grants right now with, lots of tech companies will not give you a grant to develop courses focused around their technology. We've gotten some grants from like, Google and Microsoft and some of these other big tech companies. We've gotten quite a few from like MongoDB, for example. And we love creating courses that incorporate those tools. And we're very transparent about like this course is made possible by a grant from, New Relic or whomever we're working with, and covering open source technologies and stuff. But the reality is that is a windfall, and we can't just count on that being there.
You can't rely on it. Yeah.
Yeah. You can't rely on income from YouTube. You can't rely on income from, Google AdSense, or you can't even rely on Google to send traffic to you. Like I wrote this comprehensive history of the 100 days of code, which I have a comprehensive interview with Andrew Calloway, and I've hung out with him in person in Toronto and done all these things. And like, yet my article is not the top ranking article on the history of 100 days of code. It's some software.com that, heavily links to my article, but it probably written by an LLM or something. Right. So it's like, you can't take for granted any of the hard work you're doing is going to stand the test of time and is going to continue to like deliver any sort of value for you. So, obviously like I'm kind of planning for like an entire charity, and we're trying to save as much as we can for unknown things that could happen. But, with your family, you've got 2 young kids that depend on you. You've got yourselves. You've got to reliably be able to make, mortgage payments and all these things. And yeah, there's like just the world is just awash in risk. And the more planning you can do, the more conservative you can be in making, purchases or committing to, anything. Like it sounds like you've really learned to be economical over the years, surviving in New York City on a very
Well, it helps when you only made $14 an hour,
Yeah.
But I think I'm like too much on the anxious side. I think too much about money. So we're trying to get me less anxious. I'm been watching like Ramit Sethi. Ramit, he had a Netflix show, but the book I Will Teach You to Be Rich. But he has like a YouTube channel now that I periodically watch. And he's like, you have to use your money. You have to spend it for like yourself, like to make you happy. And that shouldn't come with guilt. And I feel like as like a first generation immigrant and not knowing how the US system worked and having to learn everything from scratch, like retirements and stuff like that. Like I had to teach my dad about 401ks when he's like almost 60, right? And I'm like, these are the things like generational knowledge, generational wealth, but I feel like even more important than generational wealth is like the generational knowledge you have as an American that gets passed on from your parents that I didn't have. And that just really like made me like really, really anxious about our future and stuff like, especially now we have kids. But now I'm like, okay, you know what? We're pretty stable. We have careers. Like I need to be able to enjoy what we have. And especially since COVID happened, I was like, wait, everything we thought we can just push off to later to enjoy, it might not even exist in 5 years. Like all we took for granted would always be, that's why we never had a honeymoon, because we're like, oh, we can go on a honeymoon when we have money, when we're stable. And then COVID happened. And then like, we haven't gone anywhere in the past 5 years, except like Seattle last year. And so we're trying to like balance being financially responsible and knowing my income could stop at any moment.
Yeah.
And I would have to go get a job or something. But then, childcare, I don't even know if I can get a job that pays enough to pay me more than what I would pay in two daycares. So it's been like a transition going from the $14 an hour in New York City, will do anything for cheap rent, to like, okay, now we have to like raise these children and pay for everything associated with it, but also make sure we're like enjoying our life, not leaving it off to when we're 75 and retired.
Yeah, there's definitely a tension there. Like, and for many, many years, like I was just obsessed with saving. Like I would save like nearly half of my income, which as a teacher was not a lot of money. And as a software engineer was a little bit more. But yeah, I totally hear what you're saying. Like, we've got these kids and we want them to have a childhood. And so we want to be able to take them over to spend the summer with their grandparents in China and get Chinese, exposure to Chinese culture, Chinese history, Chinese language. Yeah, there's definitely a tension there. You have to spend money to do these things. So, I applaud you for being so deliberate in thinking about these things and grappling with them, because a lot of people they don't plan, right? Few people plan to fail. Most people fail to plan. And it sounds like you're being proactive about that. And it sounds like you've got a really healthy relationship with your husband as well. The fact that you can talk so candid about these and have this level of transparency, because I know so many couples who like one of them gets interested in gambling or something like that, or making very dubious, stock investment decisions and things like that. Next thing you know, like the entire family is kind of like on the hook for bad decisions that one person made or something like.
I mean, I think we should buy more Amazon and Target stock from the amount of money I'm spending every month on them, on the kids. But other than that, I'm sure he thinks it's like ridiculous how many diapers I buy. But and I'm like, oh, this toy, oh, this book. And then you're like looking at the bills going like, what happened? I just bought a couple toys.
Yeah. But, the good news is those toys can be passed down or even keep, donate. Like we donated almost all the toys that we acquired. And we got a lot of toys secondhand from family
Mm-hmm.
and friends and stuff like that. And so there's kind of like this informal toy, like
Exchange going
gifting
on.
economy. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So that is a great news. And like, it feels very different when you're buying something like, oh, I went and spent like $6 on a fancy, drink at the coffee shop, and I just drank it, and like, that's that, there goes that $6. Whereas you're getting a toy that your kid's going to potentially have like lifelong memories about playing with, and it's going to potentially help improve their motor skills or something like that. Right. Like a
Mm-hmm.
total different justification process when you have kids and you're spending money on your kids. Uh,
Yeah.
I want to talk to you a little bit about platform risk. You mentioned it, and I talked about the platform risk that our charity faces, drawing a lot of money from these grants and from YouTube ad revenue and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But where would you recommend if somebody were to go and publish courses in 2024? Let's say hypothetically somebody's like, I'm really interested in COBOL, for example. Very old programming language, but still very widely used. With government offices, and there are a lot of companies that work with it, or they have this very specific niche, this tool that they are very excited about. And I've talked to so many people over the years who've found a niche, like you've found a niche in preparing people for the entry level AWS certifications. How would you go about it if you were starting from scratch? Like somebody has this niche they're interested in potentially learning in public and maybe eventually doing what you've done in their particular niche. Like, could you give us like a very brief, what you've learned, looking back, what you would do now based on what you've learned?
Yeah, so I talk about this a little bit in my blog. I write about how to become and entails what it entails to be a LinkedIn Learning instructor. But so in my case, it's like a really like loaded question for yourself that you really have to like think about and weigh the pros and cons, because even if you uploaded YouTube, you do own that YouTube channel and stuff, but YouTube can change the algorithm at any time. So yeah, you own it a little more than you would if you put it up on LinkedIn Learning, but the risks are pretty similar. And one of the biggest things that I think LinkedIn Learning has provided for me is the platform and the reach. And if you have like millions of followers already, I think you'd probably be better off publishing your courses on, is it Kajabi? There's like a lot of platforms where you can host video courses and you basically retain most, if not all of the revenue that you generate. And you would sell your courses for, like $300, $500. What LinkedIn Learning has provided for me is they have a subscription service. If you have LinkedIn Premium, you get free access to LinkedIn Learning. And you can also buy a subscription to LinkedIn Learning for, maybe like $30 a month or $35 a month or something like that. And you get access to the whole platform. And that kind of reach, I personally can't have. And I can't spend enough marketing dollars to get that kind of reach where they literally have all of LinkedIn. And the fact that I can even like not have a full-time job is because of that huge reach, even though because you're getting paid in royalties, they get to keep like a pretty big portion of the revenue that you generate. So for me, it's kind of like, I guess it's a huge platform risk because they can always just get rid of my courses. But being a LinkedIn Learning instructor has come with a prestige because it's kind of mostly like an invitation based system. I think it has like a different feel than a Udemy instructor where you can
I
upload
mean,
courses.
Udemy, anybody can publish, right? Like
Anyone
it's
can
just
upload. Yeah. And there are amazing courses on there, but people feel like they have to be like really cognizant and have it be really recommended to them to be like, okay, this is a good course, it's worth investing. Whereas LinkedIn Learning, it's like invitation based and they work with you to create and publish the course. They all kind of have like a uniform look to it and uniform quality to it. So I think just the fact that I have LinkedIn Learning instructor on my resume has really helped me as like a content creator get that like prestige where I had none because I'm like literally a professional beginner
yeah.
and I don't have like a background in IT or whatever in computer engineering degrees. And I think without it, I would never have become like an AWS hero and I would never have had the impact that I have because I just don't have that kind of reach. And I felt that when I published like ebooks and stuff myself, yeah, I don't get maybe 100, 200, 300 people buying it, but I can't offer things for such low cost to this many people. And if I offer things at such low cost, I don't make any money. So then I can't do this as a full-time job. And I think being on that big platform has really helped me balance those like number of people taking it versus how much I'm able to offer it for. Because, like as you were saying, you have to get grants, you have to get donations to make it like worthwhile for people to be able to create these content because they also have to feed their family too. It's like I think the internet likes to think of us as like this like forever giving and we don't have our own personal needs, but like I have kids, I have a family, I also need to eat and pay my lights.
Yeah.
I can't work for free as much as I would love to work for free and get paid in clout, as they used to say.
Yeah.
Um,
Paid in, what was it?
Paid in
There was like
poppy.
a famous exposure. Like
Yeah, yeah,
the
get paid
guy
in
gets the piece.
exposure.
Oh, here it is. This is exposure. Oh, okay, awesome.
Yeah,
And
put
then
that exposure
they take that
badge on
exposure and
there.
they go to the sandwich stand. They're like, "Hey, can I get a sandwich with
Can I
this
pay an
exposure?"
exposure? Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
unfortunately, you cannot.
Yeah. In my early 20s, I think I still felt mid 20s, late 20s, like I still felt that like, oh, I can do all this work for free. I can run AWS newbies for free. I can continue creating content for free. But I feel like once I hit my 30s, I'm like, wait, I have to get paid for what I do because it's just not sustainable. And I'm burning myself out, keeping a full-time job to fuel my like passion and content creation. And I'm like, the easiest way is to get paid
Yeah,
for what I'm good at instead of having to suffer through a full-time job that I'm not really engaged in. So,
yeah.
yeah.
So you've definitely painted like a pretty detailed picture of like for people who are considering leaving full time work, for mothers who are considering doing this as a way to spend a lot of time with their kids, while also having like flexible, like actualizing work because childcare is exorbitantly expensive in this country, and hopefully that's something that will change in the near future. But for now, it's ridiculous, and
Yeah.
yeah, it like really constrains what you can do as a family. Like at least during that period before your kids are old enough to go to school. I think once they can go to school, that does dramatically reduce costs. We never had to provide, like, we didn't even have a babysitter or anything. We just like stayed with our kids all day, and because
Wow.
I have the luxury of working remotely, I just hung out on the couch and like watched them roll around on the floor and be silly little munchkins, right? And again, like I can definitely see the appeal, and I imagine a lot of people would like to do what you have done, what I have done, essentially working remotely or working asynchronously, where you can do it on a project basis. So I think a lot of people are going to walk away from this conversation with a lot more insight into what that looks like and how it can be practically possible. But it's not a walk in the park. It's not like, you just get your giant check from LinkedIn Learning every month and everything's gravy and you never have to worry about anything again for the rest of your life. No, life goes on, and revenue sources dry up and you have to adapt. And so I really appreciate what you just said about, like, LinkedIn Learning is a great way to get distribution. There's the saying that first time founders focus on product or focus on technology, like the implementation details. Second time founders focus on distribution. How are they going to actually get things in front of potential customers? And it sounds like LinkedIn Learning has been a huge way to do that. Congratulations again on becoming an AWS hero, which is a distinction that very few people have, that AWS only awards to like the most skilled and capable teachers of using AWS. And I don't know, there are probably thousands of people out there that make their living off teaching and consulting around using AWS and other cloud platforms. But you're one of very few AWS heroes. So
Yeah. It's just, it's kind of like, I was like, wait, are you sure you can give this distinction to me? There's only like 220, 30 of us in the world. And I'm like, I can log into AWS. But, apparently, as a community hero, what's important is like the impact you've had in the community.
yeah,
And I have a lot of I guess, imposter syndrome, especially not coming from an engineering background. But one thing that's like always helped me is like numbers don't lie. And the number of people who message me and the number of people who are taking my courses and my courses all having like 4.8 or 4.9 ratings after thousands of people reviewing them. And I'm just like, you know what, maybe I can do this. And it kind of sucks that it takes like over 500,000 people to like tell me that I'm good at what I do. But I guess it doesn't help that I was raised being told I can't do anything. But
Yeah.
it's like I'm just like trying to like work through it. And that's another big thing that I'm working with my kids, and we're trying to like break like I guess generational trauma. But I'm like, I want you to find things that you're good at. I wouldn't say like pursue your passions, because I feel like we were raised, well, the not super Asian parts of us were raised, millennials were raised being told, do what you love, and then that hasn't worked out for a lot of us.
Yeah. I would
But
definitely not
I'm
make it
like,
as a professional video game player.
yeah. It hasn't worked out for a lot of us, but I've also like, I want you to be able to find something you're passionate about and at least make that into a big part of your life. It might not be what pays the bills. You do need to pay your bills somehow, but you need to find something you're good at. And then I'm willing to like invest money and time and resources to like help you build that out so that maybe you wouldn't end up finding out near 30 that something that you loved as a middle schooler was a career that could have like actually been a very stable career. But all
Well,
in all, I think I took a lot of weird like loops, and I've had a lot of setbacks and a lot of career changes, but they've all like ended up piling on top of each other. And without like even the brain surgery, and like I learned when I was pregnant with my first son that I had a stroke when I was probably in like high school or college. I didn't even know. My medical records, they just casually was like, there was a stroke. And I'm like, would have been nice if you told me at some point before I turned like 32. But I think like even every little thing that I experienced and had to overcome, it ended up like contributing to me being able to explain things really well to beginners. So it's just like been really interesting how that has folded out. Every time I thought I'm like, I failed, it's done, like I've just wasted 5 years of my life, 8 years of my life. And then turns out like every portion of it was really important to landing here and doing what I do now. So
yeah. Yeah. Well, we're so thrilled to have you in the community, to have you still powering through, given all the obstacles life and fate is thrown in your way. And I mean, you have really been like a textbook example of taking the lemons life has given you and turning them into lemonade. It's really, really firing me up. Like just thinking about the progress you're making. Ever since I read that article about your recovery from brain surgery, where they like, as you said, scrambled your left and
yeah, like on
frontal
the frontal
lobe. I
lobe
mean,
over here.
it's like that's a
Yeah, I'm like
crazy
missing
important
like an
part of
eighth
your
of my brain or
brain.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah. And people are like, you function pretty well for someone missing like a portion of your brain. I'm like, yeah, I think so too. I'm doing pretty good for missing like this much of my brain over here.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a tribute to the plasticity, I guess, of the human brain and the flexibility of
And I think the
life.
bilingualism they said
Yeah.
helped because I have so many, I guess I have more parts of the brain I use, and I'm also left-handed, but I
Oh,
write with my right, and they think like that also really helped with like I'm using different parts of the brain than normal people, so the impact of that area was able to get like mitigated a little bit maybe, and that they think that might be why I recovered a lot more than they expected me to recover.
so you were like the most prepared person ever for brain
Yeah.
surgery.
Yeah, and I'm left-handed, and that was controlled by my right side. So the fact that it was on the left side, I didn't use that part as much. I don't know, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, I mean, like obviously, like everything you've dealt with that you've written about, like, and again, I encourage everybody to read your post from a while back where you're looking back on the anniversary of the surgery and like everything that's transpired since then. And if, with your permission, I'd love to use the picture of you called it your staple tiara, I think.
yeah.
Uh,
Everyone thought I was married. Like I got married. They thought it was my wedding photo.
really, because it's like but if you look closely, it's just hundreds of staples.
It, yeah, it's like 75 staples. I didn't know that's how you can still kind of see like this is like So it was from like here to
Yeah, like a
here.
linear scar.
Yeah,
That
all
yeah.
across my head, but it was all stapled with silver staples. And I was like in all white because I'm in the hospital. So when I uploaded that picture on
Ah.
Facebook, everyone thought I got married, and they're like, "Congratulations!" And I'm like, "No, no, actually, no." So that was like really funny. And
Wow.
then it was
Yeah.
like really interesting because the way they take it out is they literally have a huge staple remover, like the regular staple remover, but it's just huge, and they just like pull it out one by one.
Ouch.
And I was like, is this really the 21st century? Like, you're literally pulling 75 staples from my head with no anesthesia? Like, so,
Yeah.
a lot of interesting experiences.
Yeah. Well, so if you're listening just to the audio version, I will have a picture of the staple tiara. So they just like they cut it open and they peeled your scalp back and then they bored into
They
your
did
skull
front, yeah.
front. Okay.
Yeah. And then
Yeah.
they just put it back. And actually, my skull is stapled in my back with titanium clips.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually have like titanium clips like here and here or something that's holding my skull together on my
Wow.
forehead. And
Because they
I
had to
was like,
like
oh,
they had to
maybe,
remove part of your skull to
yeah, they
perform the
had to
surgery.
take the skull out, do stuff, and then put it back, and then they like basically clipped it back together. So you can actually feel it. If we ever
Wow.
meet, you can touch it.
Okay. Well, that'll be weird.
Yeah, some people really want to touch it, and other people are like, oh, well, no, no, that's not okay.
No,
So
I
depends
mean,
on what kind of person you are.
no, it's remarkable that they can do these kinds of things.
I know.
Like
Yeah.
you said, it's still kind of barbaric, like ripping staples out of your head. But I mean,
Yeah.
that's a tribute to the pragmatism of medicine that like staples
Yeah.
of all things is
And
how
then
they
you can't
figured out.
tell, it's
Yeah,
crazy. You can't tell. Like, unless
yeah,
I pointed it out, like, you can't tell that I have a scar from like here to here.
yeah.
So it's pretty amazing what medicine can do. And now, if I had the same condition, they might not even have to cut me open. They might be able to like go through one of my large veins and like
Oh,
fix it that
really?
way. So,
Wow,
yeah.
that's wild. Just going through a
Medicine.
vein with like an endoscopic tube thing, and then going in and
Yeah. They would
yeah.
like put a coil in. And for me, like that was like not an option. So they decided to do open surgery, but you could also do like radiation and they would
Mhm.
just radiate that specific area and shrink the blood vessels and stuff like that.
Yeah,
There's like a lot
I
of
mean, there's a lot of risk
treatments
with all
available now.
those different things, though. I'm just really
Yeah.
grateful that everything worked out and that you've been able to. I mean, it's remarkable. Like talking to you, I would never have an idea that you at one point had trouble speaking, that you had aphasia.
Yeah.
Uh, it's just remarkable what you've accomplished in terms of your recovery. That even I, as a layperson, can observe here. So, I just want to thank you again, Hiroko, for being so open about your journey from, a person who had to get their skull partially removed and
Yeah.
have this, extremely invasive procedure done to recovering, to learning IT, to moving to the big city, New York City. Few people have the audacity to do such a thing, certainly not when they're recovering from, everything that you're recovering from, and then working in IT and then climbing the ranks and discovering cloud computing and going on to teach 500,000 people, probably a whole lot more than that, how to earn AWS certifications and giving them the confidence and the clarity to be able to do so. It's just a remarkable thing that you've accomplished here, and it's very inspiring. And I really appreciate you taking 2 hours of your life to sit down with me and relay all this to me and to the good people listening to this conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. Like, I told my husband I'm having an interview with FreeCodeCamp, and he's like, "What?" So he's an
Yeah,
engineer too. So it's like, oh, that's pretty cool. So
yeah.
yeah.
Well, please thank you for his kind words and for everything he's doing to help you be able to teach. There's a saying like behind every great man, there's a woman, and I guess in this case, behind the great woman is a man who's also helping provide the stable income so that you can continue to do this.
Yeah. The
Yeah,
roles have switched. No, not really, but
awesome.
no,
Well,
thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And everybody tuning in, until next week, happy coding.